national or governmental agency. So I think you know it is important that the work you do with that money is you know appear somewhere. So there's some kind of return to the society from the fund that were provided. So no manches is my favorite Mexican expression, so it had to be featured in my talk. So here it is. Here's my little plug. Uh, so how to start to write a paper? I think the preparation is, and the first question you should probably be asking yourself is what type of articles you want. Do you want to do a review of the literature, or do you want to write an original research article, or do you have like just one or two interesting data that could be condensed in a short paper, like a brief report or a short communication? Or do you want to write something that is a bit more opinionated, like in a commentary? So I think having that in mind to begin with is really important. Um, and also, like, you know, always discuss with your colleagues from your lab, from your department, from your mentor. I think they can really help you decision. I think especially considering like the distinction between an original research article and a report, sometimes like there's a fine line there. So I think like having a discussion with your colleagues is always very useful. Again, you should decide where to submit. I think that that's very important to think carefully about that. So there are a number of things you should look at. First of all, look at the aims and scope statement of the journal. So on every journal homepage, there is a section that will be called aims and scope or something similar that will describe basically the field of research that are covered in the journal. So carefully read those instructions to make sure that the research you have conducted falls in line with the scope of the journal. Also, you know, look at the impact factor of the journal. I think that also can help you make a decision. Is your finding really like groundbreaking and be worthy of a publication in a very high impact factor journal like Nature, Science, Cell Press, or Devante Kami? Or is your research just sound science? It is like solid science, but you know you have like negative results, which you know maybe be worthy of being published, but obviously the type of journal you would be aiming for would be greatly different. Um, I'll be talking about content access model in a few slides. Also think about the type of editors also, so I'll be covering that later. Also, every journals have sometimes adopt different peer review models. So depending on your preference regarding whether you want to know the identity of the reviewers, for instance, or if you want the comments of the reviewers to be publicly available, I think that can also help you make a decision. So I mentioned a little something about journal impact. So the journal impact factor is by far the most widely known and in the industry, but there are like a number of factors out there which are listed here. So these are like numbers that you can look up and that may help you make your decision regarding which journal would be most suitable for you. I don't know if you know how the impact factor is calculated, but it's the number of citation in a given year, which is divided by the total number of articles published in the previous 2 years, just for your information. Am I speaking too fast, or is everything that I'm saying clear, or like so far so good? All right, thank you. That just check here. All right. Oops. Content access models is a very important point. I'm sure you probably heard about open access journals. Um, so access journals, the content is freely available to read, but the authors have to pay an article publication fee, which in some instance can be pretty substantial. I think the average is probably around 2 or 3,000 US dollars. So if you don't have that fund available from within your department, organization, or via your funders, maybe a subscription journal may be a better option for you. So there are some journals that are called subscription-only journals, so they will only publish content that is only accessible to subscribers. And we have like journals that are called hybrid, which is a mix between subscription only and open access. Basically, the hybrid journals are subscription journals that allow authors to publish open access should they wish to do so. So it's basically the best of both worlds. Um, so the majority of our journals at Wiley, for instance, are hybrid journals. So I think all our subscription journals allow open access publication, as far as I know. And increasingly, we are launching more and more open access journals because in some communities are increasing need for that. Any questions about publication model?
How we
So for so, so the hybrid journals basically like all the content will be accessible to subscribers, but like individual articles that have paid the open access fee will be available to everyone. So basically, even if you're not a subscriber, the hybrid journal, you'll have access to the open access articles. This is a very useful tool, Journal Finder. So at Wiley, we have a tool that if you paste your abstract in this at this website, journalfinder.wiley.com, I think it mostly works on Chrome. So do not try it on Explorer. I tried it and I had issues lately. But if you try it on Chrome, you paste your abstract, the tool will give you as an output a list of Wiley journals that would be suitable for your article based on the abstract provided. So I think that's a very useful tool for you to help make a small selection of journals to look further into. Um, and there's also a website called Jane for Journal Author Name Estimator. Um, and that tool is Pan Publisher. So they have like a number of journals from Wiley and other publishers. So that's also a very useful tool that you may want to consider using to help you make your decision. Important notice, beware of predatory journals. I'm not sure whether you heard about these. Basically, there are some uh, naughty publishers out there that are exploiting the open access model. And they are not offering like any real service. They don't do any peer review. They publish anything they get after the author have paid a fee. Oftentimes, they also steal the name of real people and put that on their website as being the editors, and those editors are not actually working for the journal. Oftentimes they're not even aware that their name have been used in some capacity. um, so it's never a good thing to for your paper to end up being published in such journals. So always be very careful regarding where you submit your journal. Look at who's the publisher behind the journal, right? I mean, while we don't have like, predatory journals, they're all like very solid journals. Look maybe at society affiliation to the journal. Look for indexation and impact factor. Normally, if a journal has an impact factor, it's pretty rare that it will be a predatory journal. There are a number of websites that list potentially predatory journals. So if you are planning to publish open access, and if you come across journals that raise some question marks in your head, I invite you to look at some of those lists. I think the best one is probably stop predatory journals. Um, yeah, this one is probably the most comprehensive and up to date. Bill's list has been is no longer being updated, and I think Cabell's is requires subscription. There's also a useful appraisal tool out there, which is called Think, Check, and Submit. That a series of questions that you should be asking yourself to ensure that your paper doesn't end up being published in a predatory journal. So before we go into how to write the paper, I think the most important advice I can give you here is to read carefully the author guidelines. So every journals will have that listed on their website. It is not a page turner or a price of literature piece. It is pretty boring, I have to admit, but it is so important that you carefully read it because making sure that your manuscript is compliant with the journal guidelines will definitively greatly help you being published in the journal. It will be less work for the reviewers and editors to look at your paper because everything will be already in line with the style they are asking for. Unfortunately, like most journals have like a different style. At Wally, we're making a lot of efforts to try to consolidate and ask for the same section and same format. But there are still like some differences depending on the journal. So always carefully read the author guidelines and make sure that you are compliant as much as possible. So going into the general structure of the research article, and I'll go into detail into all those sections, but obviously your article should have a title, should have the list of authors, should have an abstracts, and then the main core of the article contains the introduction, the materials and methods section, the results, and a discussion. In some instance, you can add a conclusions, um, there's acknowledgements, reference, and in some instance, supplementary data. And I'll go quickly through all those sections in the slides. Um, Generally speaking, I advise people to write their article backwards, meaning that I like to start working on the figures and tables and really use that to anchor the article already. Then going into the description of the results and what's in the figures and also like how the results were obtained in the materials section. The introduction after discussion and conclusion, and then like at the very end you should write the title and abstract. I think you really should have like your full paper ready to be able to decide on those final section. They are very important to get right because oftentimes they are the mostly read part of the article, and it's really like the doorway to your article. If your title and abstracts are not well written, no one will read the article, or at least you won't be reaching out to the right audience. And an article, I like to see it as being like in a house, really. Each section has its own purpose. It's really like in a house, you know, you're not going to sleep in the kitchen and you're not going to cook in the living room. So an article is pretty much the same, you know, like an introduction has like special characteristic, result section also special characteristic, and I'll go through that. Okay, so the title. My advice for the title is try to make it as short and concise as much as possible. Basically summarizing your main finding within like one sentence, ideally. Avoid any like jargons or abbreviation or things that, you know, like a wider audience, people outside of your specific field may not necessarily understand. Again, like keep in mind that this is really the doorway to your article. So it's really important to get this right. Make it clear, short, crisp, and concise. Words. Keywords are very important to help the discovery of your articles. So most journals will require to provide a list of anywhere between 5 to 10 keywords. Basically, they should be like a short, they are like 1 or 2 word description that summarize the main concepts or biological phenomenon, for instance, that you've studied. Ideally, they should appear in some capacity in your titles and in your abstract and repeated in like subheadings or throughout the article. I think the frequent use of such keywords and providing them at the submission stage will also help for your paper to be discovered by the people that are interested in work similar to you. The abstract, normally it's a very short paragraph, and it's basically like a short summary of what the article is about. So I like to have about 1 or 2 sentences that put the study in perspective, basically like a short summary of what the introduction is. Then I summarize in 1 or 2 sentences the main methodology that I've used, in 1 or 2 sentences the main findings, and then I like to end with 1 or 2 sentences with like a broader perspective regarding what this means for the field or what are the next steps for your particular line of experiment. Again, like the abstracts is oftentimes the most widely read section of the article. So it's again the front way to your article. The abstracts are freely available online also, so that's also that increase the frequency of being read, obviously. So it's really important that you get the abstract right if you want your article to be read by the right people. The core components of the article. So first, the introduction. The introduction really puts the study into context. What is known from the existing literature about your particular line of study? And why did you decide to conduct that particular study? And what are the main questions you're being asked? Materials and methods. You should describe all the techniques and reagents that you've used. You should try to detail them as much as possible so someone who reads you is able to replicate your research. In the case that you've just reuse a protocol that is already existing, I would always advise to simply make a citation to the protocol, to the paper that contained the actual protocol that was used. So there's probably no need to repeat previous experiments that have been described elsewhere. The results should describe the main findings and ideally include figures and tables. And footnote here, always be very careful with the statistics. So if you're not an expert, ask someone, a department or university that can help you with that. Obviously important that your results are statistically significant. And then the discussions is basically an interpretation of the results and put it into broader perspective, the importance of your work for your particular field and what are the next steps you'd like your research to take. The references section, well, basically it's a list of all the citations that are appear throughout the articles. Oftentimes it is the section that contains the most mistakes and errors, so be careful with them. There are lots of reference tools out there, EndNote, reference managers. I don't know if you use any of these, or I think Mendeley also is another one. And most journals have a plugin, so you just have to select the name of the journal and automatically your article will be converted in the right style. So I invite you to use those reference tools to help you because I know in terms of, there's a lot of formatting requirements, can be a bit painstaking sometimes. So yeah, reference section, always be careful. The acknowledgement section, so you should acknowledge your colleague that may have provided some help with rereading the article or who provided some cell lines or reagent. Always acknowledge and thank your funding agency. I think they'll appreciate that. In some instances, it's really required. So always advise you to do that. If you have any conflicts of interest, say you work for a pharma company that works on drug that cure cancer, and your paper is about that drug curing cancer, you have to make that very clear that you have an obvious conflict of interest there. Also, in the case your study involves studies with animals or human patients, also confirm that your experiments were done in an ethical fashion per the standards of your code of deontology of your university or department. Illustrations, try to make sure the resolution is close to 300 dpi. I think otherwise it will not look very nice after the typesetting. Try to keep it also in 2 dimensions if possible, so it's pretty clear. And keep in mind that for journals that are still printed in print, you may be asked to pay a fee of $500 US per colored figure. So always be very mindful of that, when using colors. Like ask yourself, like, is it really necessary? For online-only journals, colors are free. Most journals that still have a print component, you will be asked whether you want the colors to only appear online or online and in print. If you want the colors to appear in print, then you will likely have to pay of somewhere close to $500 per figure. So something to keep in mind. And also ultimately that may also determine where you want to submit your article. Supplementary data. So most of the journals allow authors to provide supporting information that not necessarily belong to the core article, but like are very useful to help understand the paper, or allow also readers to access like the raw data that was used and processed in the results section of the paper. They should be submitted at the same time as the manuscript, obviously. But keep in mind, oftentimes there's a limit of the size of the file you can upload on our digital systems. So ideally, I recommend that it should be no larger than 50 MB. And I'm saying that because oftentimes the supplementary data can be pretty large files, especially if you have videos. So yeah, always be careful regarding like the size of the files you want to upload. Important to note here for supplementary data, unlike the rest of the article, it's not going to be typeset by the publisher. So the format that you provide to the journal, that's the way it's going to appear. So basically, if you want your supplementary data to look nice, well, you have to provide them in a nice way to begin with. So keep that in mind. So we went through all the section of the paper, and then one important part is to write a cover letter. So you should address to the editor of a journal, ideally naming him or her or the name of the journal. So make sure the journal, you have the right name of the journal to begin with, even if you've submitted previously at other journals and you've rejected. So make sure you have the right name of the journal, and explain to the editor why you think your research is important and falls within the scope of the journal. And I think it's pretty important to, it's really your chance to sell your story to the editor and try to convince him or her of the worthiness, so to say, of your paper to be published in their journals. You should also disclose any conflict of interest in your cover letter. If you have preferred reviewers, you can mention them there. If there are people that you don't want them to be reviewing your paper, also mention that to the editors. So yeah, very important to have your cover letter really address to the editor why you think your paper should be published. My colleague Eduardo mentioned something about Wiley editing service. So Wiley and the majority of the publishers out there can help our authors to write their paper. So we offer language editing service, translation service. We offer figure preparation service. So in the case that you feel that you need, additional supports with language, for instance, or with figure preparation, there are a number of services that are available on the website that I mentioned here. Okay, so we have a cover letter, we have a paper. We are sure that our um, style is compliant with the author guidelines. A few other things to be aware of. One, I think it's important to make sure that all the authors are correctly listed. I've come across papers where there are typos in the names of the people or they don't have the right affiliation. And do not, use the name of people that are famous in the field just to put that on your paper and in the hope that it will help the acceptance of your paper. I've seen that too. So make sure that all the authors that are listed have contributed in a significant fashion to the story. Also, always number the pages and the lines. You would not know how much it is helpful for the editors and the reviewers. Otherwise, it's very difficult for the editors and reviewers to figure out, like what what a particular comment may be referring to, because some people may be like counting the pages from the first page or from the abstract or from the introduction. So always number the pages and the lines. It will save a lot of headaches to you editors and reviewers. So the majority of the journals that are there use online submission system that you'll have to create an account and log in order to submit. The majority of the journals at Wiley are on Scholar One. We have a number of journals also on editorial managers. So the interface of the platform will also differ depending on the journal. And it's like once you have an account, you'll have to follow like a stepwise process, and you'll be asked to upload, enter your title, the name of the author's abstract, and all the component of the article. So normally it's pretty straightforward. In the case that you encounter difficulties, so every journals have an editorial office. So feel free to contact the editorial office should, for whatever reason, have difficulties submission process. We have people in-house at Wiley or at our vendors that can help you with the submission process should there be a glitch of some sort. So after you submit, then begin the peer review process where your manuscript will be assigned to an editor who will make an initial decision, and then he or she will send that to reviewers. And based on the comments of the reviewers, the editor will make a decision. And we'll discuss that in the coming slides. And I think a lot of researchers see the peer review process as a daunting and bruising experience, uh, which it can be, but try to go about the process in like an open-minded fashion and do not take the comments personally. In principle, the reviewer should be professional in their input and comments. I've seen instances where it was less so, but the editors should be removing those uh, less nice things, let's say, that appears in reviewers' comments. But basically, try to use their comments to improve the paper. That's really important. And why is peer review important? Well, it is at the moment probably the best system we have to evaluate, the credibility and the importance of scientific research. Um, Also to determine the originality of the paper, and also try to identify plagiarism, which also again happens every so often. So yeah, it's by far not a perfect model. There are multiple alternatives, but at the moment it's the best we've have, and the majority of researchers out there seems to agree that it is an important process. Okay, the different types of editors. I remember when I was a researcher myself, I never really understood who were the editors and where they were based and all of that. So it was always very intriguing for me. And that's certainly one of the reasons why I decided to switch to scientific publishing. But there are two main types of editors. So there are full-time employees at publishing houses like Wiley or Elsevier or Springer Nature that basically they are like former PhD researchers or postdocs that have made a transition to scientific publishing. And they work at a full-time capacity for the journals that they work for. So, and in opposite to that, there are journals that operate with external or academic editors. So those editors are basically contracted by the publishing houses. They are researchers at university. For instance, at UNAM, we have 4 editors, as I've mentioned in the first slide. And those editors have, teaching duty. They have like active researchers. They have, they are the head of a group of research of some sort. And on top of that, they work for the publishing houses or the journal, so to say, and they're under contract, and that's the type of journals I deal with. So my job is basically to make sure that for all of my journals, I have enough editors and do a good job. So more in a concrete fashion, some examples. So in-house editors, oftentimes they can be found at very prestigious journals with high impact factor. There are exceptions here, but oftentimes, like majority of the cell press journals or Nature or PLOS or Science, for instance, or Angevante Chemie, which is published by Wiley, these journals operate with full-time employees, meaning they have probably more time to dedicate to the journal. But then again, like those journals are very prestigious, so oftentimes the number of submissions they receive is pretty high. So again, make sure that your article is very well written, so to help, um, you know, try to influence things in your favor. And I've listed a number of other journals with external editors. Essentially, like the majority of the journals published by Wiley or Elsevier or Springer Nature will adopt an external editor's model. So probably like the fraction is probably 10% of journals that have in-house editors versus 90% of the journals that are out there that have contracted external editors. Are there any questions about this? Is that clear? Or? Also, most journals will have different levels of editors within the editorial office, and that depends on a number of factors, mostly the number of submission the journal will get, but oftentimes, like normally, there will be like an editor-in-chief that will be supported possibly by a deputy editor, and oftentimes by a number of associate or senior editors. And the manuscripts will switch hands. So, like it is likely that your papers will be handled by a number of editors during the peer review process, and I'll give you some examples later. And all the editors are supported by editorial board members, and oftentimes the board members will act as frequent reviewers and advisors for the. So yeah, as I was mentioning, journal has really its own particularities regarding the workflow, and that really explains why if you publish multiple articles or if you submit your manuscript after being rejected at one place somewhere else, your experience will be very different. And that depends on what kind of, who's the publisher of the journal, how many editors they have, how many submissions they get, where in the world the editors are, how busy they are. Um, Depends also on the field of research. In some communities, the model of peer review is different. So there's a number of factors that explains why your experience is greatly differing depending on where you submit. So just to put things in more concrete fashions, I give you some two examples here. On the left side, it's an example of an editorial workflow for very small journals, say a journal that will get about 100 to 200 submissions per year. Oftentimes, after the submission, there will be an administrator that will check your manuscript to make sure that everything is in line with the author guidelines, that all the sections are there. And then the administrator will assign the paper to the editor-in-chief, who will probably be like handling all the papers himself or herself and be responsible for finding the reviewers and making the editorial decisions. Whereas larger journals, here I made a potential example of a journal that receive over 1,000 submissions per year. They will still be an administrator, but they will be an editor-in-chief, probably supported by multiple associate editors that will handle papers depending on their subject of experience and expertise. So as you can appreciate, the experience you'll get will greatly differ depending on the size of your journal. And also, like in some instance, your paper will go through the hands of multiple editors throughout the peer review models. I think I mentioned that as being like a potential factor to help you determine where to submit your article. So most of the journals out there adopt a single blind model where the authors do not know the identity of the reviewers, but the reviewers know the identity of the authors. Some journals operate with a double blind peer review model where the reviewers and authors do not know the identity of each other. Um, Others adopt open or transparent peer review model, whereas uh, the identity of the authors and reviewers are known by each other. So it's really a matter of preference. I think every model has their pros and cons here. So it's really dependent on what you feel most comfortable with. But always carefully check that within the author guidelines, or maybe like in the aims and scope statement of the journal that normally would appear in their place. So the peer reviewers are chosen like by the editors, obviously, and uh, like within the editorial system, there's like a reviewers database, right? So that's a great resource for editors to select reviewers. But every so often, the reviewers may not be listed in there. So they'll do a research online on Google or in PubMed or another platform. They will obviously uh, use their network and collaborators as frequent reviewers. They'll use the editorial board, um, and let's see what else. And in some instances, authors provide suggestions of reviewers. I think that's always a bit tricky because sometimes authors will recommend their friends or their collaborators or their former mentors. If the editor does a good job, they will pick that up. But yeah, if you recommend reviewers, make sure that there are legit reviewers and they're not just your best friend that you know that will be giving a praise of your paper. Factor that influence the speed of peer review. So I think it's pretty clear from what I just mentioned. It will greatly depend on how the structure of the journal is and how busy the editor and how difficult it is to find reviewers. And the editors will make their editorial decision based on the alignment of your paper with the scope, also on the novelty and the impact of your research. Um Also, obviously, on the comments of the reviewers, and also like the general presentation and the quality of the language. So as possible editorial outcomes, so desk rejections are normally rejected pretty quickly. So normally after a few days or like after a week or so, basically it will be done by the first editor that handles your paper. And oftentimes these are for papers that are out of scope or lower quality. So those decisions are going to be made pretty quickly. So normally, like after submission, if you haven't heard anything after 2 weeks, like I would see that as a good thing. Like there's the likelihood that your papers have been sent out for peer review is pretty high. Um, We reject paper normally after so unfavorable feedback from reviewers. Um, Revision, obviously, it's in the case of where the editors and reviewers think that there are changes to be made, and it's often the case, right? I'm yet to encounter a paper that was accepted without any revision. So be prepared to have to go through minimally to walk through one to possibly 2 or 3 rounds of revision before your paper is finally accepted. So submitting your revision. So as I was mentioning earlier, try to take into consideration the comments of the reviewers and editors. Do not take it personal and make like use of all the hard work they've done for you basically and try to use that to improve your paper, so it's again not personal, it's just like for the good of science and really of the good of your manuscript for you to take into consideration those comments. um, do write a cover letter that will address point by point every comments of the reviewers and editors, what has been changed in the manuscript and where it has been changed, and also submit a version of the paper that has where all the changes that have been made that are highlighted. Again, your editors will love you for that. It will like help them identify the changes that have been made and will help them make a quicker decision on manuscript. So ideally, like I suggest that you submit like 2 versions of your revision, one with all the highlighted change and one clean one where like there's no highlights essentially. And yeah, rejection is not the end of the world. I know it can be pretty ego bruising and hard to take and discouraging in some instances, but sometimes it's just like a matter of alignment with the scope of the journal or so do not take it personal. There are plenty of journals out there. So it's a bit you have to go back to the drawing board, so to say, and try to go back to like the first steps we um, detail at the beginning regarding like finding a right journal for you, because there's so many journals out there. Like I would find it pretty incredible that there's no journals out there that would take your paper. Just make sure it doesn't end up in the predatory. Okay. Uh, Also, something to keep in mind is that there are lots of journals that are cascaded or as part of a network. So the publishers are trying to build these kind of services to make things easier for an author. So say you submit to like a pretty prestigious journal and it's rejected, then the editors may recommend you to consider to submit to another related journals published by the same publisher of maybe of less of a lower impact factor. If you decide to use that option, and if your paper was rejected after peer review, the reviewer's comments will be forwarded to the recipient journal. So it will also speed up the editorial process at the recipient journal. In some instance, if the recipient journal is an open access journal, you'll get a discount also. So yeah, try to make use of those options when provided to you, because I think that could greatly facilitate the publication of your article in a possibly more suitable journal. So after the manuscript acceptance, so the article will be lightly copy edited. Like so, the copy editing is normally pretty light. It will be typeset, and then it will go proofing stage. So you will be asked by our production editors or via our production system to have a look at your proofs, and then you should carefully look at them and then make any final edits or comments or correction. Once the proofs are returned, then your article will shortly thereafter appear in early view, and then eventually be included in the issue. So yeah, for any last minute correction, always do that at the proofing stage, because it's a nightmare for the editors and publishers to try to have to make corrections once the article has been published. We'll be covering that in the next slide. Copyrights. So if you publish under the subscription model, you'll be asked to sign a copyright transfer agreement. So for subscription journal, the copyright reverts to the publishers in most instances. So it's like a pretty standard form that you will be asked to sign probably like along the same time as the proofing stage or within the proofing stage. You'll be asked to sign that copyright transfer agreement. These are for subscription article. For open access articles, you'll have to make a selection of the license you want your article to be made available under. So for open access articles, the copyright stays with the authors, and depending on your preference, you should select from a number of licenses. I think there are 6 out there, while you normally use the following 3. And I don't want necessarily to go into details into the specific licenses, but I think it's important for you to decide on which license to choose that fits your ideology or interest the best. So some license allow other users to reuse your figures, for instance, for commercial purposes, or they can even modify them also. So if you're not comfortable with that, then maybe go for a more restrictive license. Something about ethics in publishing. So unfortunately, editors and publishers out there have to deal with a number of misconduct um, that they are pretty rare, but they exist and they take a lot of time to resolve, unfortunately. So we see scientific misconducts like falsification or fabrication of results, and publication misconduct. It can be plagiarism or lack of acknowledgement of contributors. Um, like maybe like you oversight your paper, for instance, just like sometimes some editors ask authors to include a lot of citation of their own journal just to artificially increase their impact factor, so that's not ethical, obviously. Some authors are trying to manipulate the peer review process. I've seen that. Also, some authors send their paper to multiple journals at once. You should never do that because, in some instance, articles got published in journals, and then it's a nightmare to solve from the publishing houses and editors. So if you want to publish, make sure that your article stays there and is not retracted or anything like that. So make sure that everything you do in terms of science and obviously publication is ethical. Because editors and publishers are getting smarter at identifying issues, and we have tools out there that allows us to detect plagiarism. For instance, this cross-check plagiarism tool is integrated in our digital system. So all the journals that have that tool, uh, like all the submissions will be automatically screened, and then the system highlights all the texts that have been copied from elsewhere, and then the editors can see where the copied text comes from. So be careful because Big Brother is watching. So this is a new tool that has just been rolled to Scholar One, and I'm pretty excited about. Like that tool basically flag any manuscripts that have gone through peer review for which like they've detected a bit uh, unusual activities. So, for instance, if you invite the reviewers and they immediately accept and they immediately provide their comments like within an hour or so, like that's pretty unusual, right? So like that tool will flag that. In some instance, authors try to manipulate the peer review process. They, they make as recommended reviewers uh, like digit people that are expert in the field, but they don't give the like professional email address, but they create a Gmail or a Hotmail or a generic email address, which is controlled by themselves, right? So like the editor, if they're not careful, they can invite the recommended reviewer that you recommended, that is the name of someone that is an expert in the field, but if they use the email address you provided, then basically the paper gets back to you. So you get to review your own paper. So never do that, okay? But that tool will pick it up because it will identify uh, papers that have been submitted and peer reviewed by the same computer or by the same IP address or by the same. So I'm pretty excited about this new tool. I think in some instance it will help our investigation to resolve more complex situations. So whenever we encounter ethical issues, publishing houses and editors refer to the COPE guidelines, which is the Committee on Publication Ethics. They have like useful flow charts that help us for investigation regarding the best route to take and how to make our decisions regarding what we should do with the particular cases. Uh, in minor cases, we'll just make a corrigendum, so it's just like a small correction of, an error that was introduced in the article. And oftentimes, the authors themselves and the editors themselves didn't realize that, so that there's no ill meaning here, so to say, and it's pretty straightforward, and the authors will just let us know what are the corrections that should have been brought in. Ideally, again, you won't prevent that from happening, so again, carefully look at your proofs, right? And in more drastic case, then we'll have to proceed with retraction or removal of article, which involves a very lengthy and complicated process and investigation. So they're restricted to like pretty rare cases, but it happens. Like for retraction, the paper stays online and they will have like a clear watermark notice here, and it's it stays on your record, so it's just not good for your career. So always be careful with what you do. Okay, I just want to finish with a few useful tools that you, I think, may be aware of or should be aware of or should take into consideration. So after you publish your article, considering like all the hard work you've done in your research and to write your article and to have to go through peer review and have it published, like I used to quickly move on to the next paper, right? But like nowadays, I see it more as like as the birth of a new life for your research, right? Now it's out there and you can help contribute to the dissemination of your work, right? I mean, you've worked so hard on your paper and your research, like why not try to help disseminate the good news of your findings? So think of when you go to conferences, you can bring copy of your article to distribute to people you meet at your poster, for instance. Um, think of social media and promote your article via social media also. So I think I have like this brochure here at the back, so I invite you to take one of these if you want to get more inspiration regarding things you can do to help promote your article. Kudos is a service that is partnering with Wiley that allows you to describe in a layman's language what your publication is about. And it also provides you with link that you can share on social media. It will also track like how many times the articles has been cited and downloaded. So it's just a nice tool for you to engage with your article and also help the dissemination of your research. Author identifier, ORC ID. I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of that or already has an identifier? Some of you. So, like at Wiley, I think at the moment, like it is required for authors to have such identifier, and that's super useful because it will basically it allows the discrimination of various researcher. I mean, some people have very similar name. I'm sure my colleague Eduardo Martinez is not the only Eduardo Martinez in the world, right? So, but I think so if Eduardo had an ORC ID, he could like discriminate his publication from the other Eduardo Martinez. And that's really important for editors or reviewers so they know like whether the Eduardo Martinez that authored the paper is the Wiley colleague or somebody else in Mexico. So I encourage you to make a request to get the ORC ID on their website. It's pretty straightforward. And again, like your whole publication history is linked to your number. And again, I think for the majority of the Wali journals at the moment, it is required to provide that at the submission stage. Manuscript and data sharing. So I often get questions regarding preprint servers, what is allowed to do there, also where to deposit data, what is allowed there. The majority of the journals out there allows you to deposit your data in institutional repository or repositories like Dryad or Figshare. Um, Regarding preprint, the majority of the journals also allow you to deposit your manuscripts on preprint like bioRxiv or other similar sites. If you want your paper to be published in a high impact factor journal like Science, Nature, Cell, Press journals, like always be very careful because I think in some instance they see preprint publication as prior art, so that may interfere with your chance of getting published there. So you want to get published in a high impact factor journal and are planning to deposit in the preprint server, always check with the editors of those journals. That's my general advice. But for most of the journals out there, that's normally fine. Article sharing, maybe you may not be aware, but like this is just an example at Wiley, for instance. Besides each article, there's this shared logo. And if you click on that, you will be provided with a shared link, which is a link that you can send by email or on social media to your collaborators and friends, and they'll have access to a read-only version of your article. So they won't be able to download it and save it, but they'll be able to read the paper. And I think you can, yeah, so that's just a great way for you to disseminate your article. In addition, Wally offers authors to share their articles to 10 of their colleagues, collaborators, or friends. So this is like the PDF file of the article itself. So I think via a similar method, you can ask our author service for like 10 of your colleagues to receive a copy of your article. Reviewer recognition programs. So at Wiley, we understand that reviewers out there are doing a lot of work to help increase the quality of our publication. So we try to reward them as much as possible. So we have a partnership with Publons, which allows our reviewers basically to keep a record of all the reviews they've done for a number of journals over the years. And we also have a reviewer certificate program where at the end of every year we send to our reviewers a certificate like the one I've shown here on the left. Not all of our journals are on that program at the moment, but we are increasingly rolling more. Finally, I just want to encourage you to get involved into like various aspects of publishing. I think as a scientist, I think it will give you like it will make you a more complete professional and will give you like a broader perspective of research, right? I mean, I used to be pretty focused on my research, and then I realized after moving to publishing that there's a whole world out there. So there's multiple ways for you to engage and to get to know more about publishing. Obviously by writing your own papers, but also you can help your colleagues with their papers, or you can like read and correct their paper before they submit. You can act as a reviewer, so you can ask, for instance, your PI or your group leader whether could help him or her to conduct some review on his or her behalf under his or her supervision. Uh, Maybe there's a journal club at your department or university that you want to participate to. I think it will make you better scientist, a better reviewer, and also by the same way, like a better author also. So yeah, there's just many ways for you to get involved with publishing. Again, I encourage you to think creatively on ways you can to contribute to basically the work we do, And also, like, I think it will help you being a more rounded scientist overall. So on that, muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I look forward to having your questions, and thank you for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias. ¿Quiénes ya están listos para publicar su artículo? Damos premio ahora. Dentro de unos segundos vamos a pasar a un pequeño coffee break, pero antes vamos a asegurarnos de que todos ustedes preguntas que quieran hacer, en caso tengan un poquito de temor de hacer las preguntas, tenemos alguna persona que nos va a ayudar. De todas las preguntas que ustedes quieran hacer, por favor.
A todos les quedó muy claro por lo visto.
Si no hay preguntas, no hay comida.
For your talk, you like reviewers database, but my question is this database open for authors or is it just for the editor?
Yeah, so the question is about the reviewers database, and it's really journal specific, and basically it's been accumulated over the years, right? Like most journals that are out there have been existing for a number of years, so the editors and past editors keep adding reviewers in the system, and so over years you build a database. So yeah, it's very journal specific. If you want yourself to be included in such database, you could, or act as a reviewer at a particular journal. I encourage you to reach out to the editor and express your interest to become a reviewer and like send your CV publication. It's up to them to decide whether like they should include you based on your expertise, type of articles they get. Yes, it's not available. Yes. No.
¿Pregunta?
During your presentation, there was a question about how they calculate the impact factor formula on slide 10. So they had a question of how it works, or they wanted to see it again. We put it. I think it's.
So basically, the impact factor is so currently. Yeah. Okay. So currently we are in 2000. So the impact factor is always released in June every year. So currently we have like the impact factor. So this June we will release the impact factor of 2008. So currently we only know the impact factor of 2017 that will contain all the sites of articles published in a particular journal divided by the number of articles that have been published over the past 2 years before 2017. So basically it's the total number of sites in 2017 divided by the total number of articles published in 2015 plus 16. So that's how the calculation is made.
¿Una otra pregunta, comentario, cuestión? Pues si no hay más, queremos agradecerle muchísimo al doctor Paul-André Genest la excelente conferencia que nos ha dado, y bueno, queremos hacerle reconocimiento de parte del Instituto de Biología por haber dado esta que le entrego en este momento, así con un pequeño
Gracias.
Se lleve de recuerdo. Muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes. Los invitamos a un pequeño convivio aquí afuera, cortesía de nuestros amigos de Wiley, a los cuales también les tenemos su detallito por habernos traído a este conferencista tan excelente.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias y los espero al ratito Nos vemos al ratito en lo de la flora del Valle de Tehuacán, de BHL, y mañana también con lo de Biodiversity Heritage Library. Entonces, unos 15, 20 minutos para regresar a la siguiente presentación.